Namaste. In this series talks of three sessions, as we had planned that there will be three topics: law of karma from the book Ancient Wisdom, Karma Yoga from Bhagavad Gita, and karma as our daily life duties. In today's session, I am going to talk about Karma Yoga from Bhagavad Gita. I'll present the slides one by one and I'll start my talk. In Kurukshetra, Sri Krishna argued against Arjuna's decision not to fight when he was wanting to renounce the glory of success and retire to the quietude of the jungle to live there the life of a monk seeking the divine. Sri Krishna also advised Arjuna to do his duty without getting himself preoccupied with its result. In Karma Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna has concluded with the inspired advocacy of the path of knowledge. Arjuna has a lot of confusions in his mind as to which of the paths he has to follow for his self-development. The Vedic philosophy of India is taught to the students during an intimate and free discussion between the teacher and the student. We all know it. There is so much freedom allowed to the student to ask freely and openly, to contradict, to argue with the teachers. It is during these discussions that the student wrestles with the teacher in the arena of intellect. And in this exercise, the teacher and the student, when they discuss, argue, contradict, the student become spiritually stronger and perfectly agile in all other layers of his personality. This Upanishadic style has been beautifully preserved and artistically employed by the great poet philosopher Vyasa in Bhagavad Gita. The arguments raised by Sri Krishna in this discourse create a grave doubt as to what exactly is the path which will take a seeker easily to realization of the absolute in himself. Is it knowledge, action, or both when we together practice in a synthesis, or is it through a total renunciation of both? And here begins the Karma Yoga Bhagavad Gita with right action. In our inborn ignorance, we act motivated by our ego and ego-centering desires. An uncultivated man acts thoughtlessly, propelled by his own wrong tendencies, ordering for himself ever a new lease of sorrowful existence. Entertaining these sensuous desires, he acts in the world seeking joy and earning for himself fleeting happiness. Endless sorrows and inadjustable mental impressions, which we otherwise know as vasanas. These vasanas invites new fields of exhaustion through their free expressions in action. The way out from this non-stop vicious circle of ego-motivated action which creates these vasanas is the path of right action. Selfless actions performed in a spirit of devotion and self-surrender exhaust the existing vasana and do not create any more fresh tragic impressions which in turn would order fresh fields of activities and actions. In this limited concept of life in Vedic period, karma meant only the ritualistic sacrifices. These activities pursued for a sufficiently long period purified the heart, integrated the personality and brought about a single pointedness of mind in the individual. Through the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna has given out a reinterpretation of the Vedic truths in the context and language of our time. Now let me talk about how it's a series of ignorance, then desires, then thoughts, and then actions. Spiritually, as we know, as the self, every one of us is all full, all complete and perfect. Due to our ignorance only, ignorance of this spiritual experience, we entertain in our intellect unending desires. Each of them brings our own intellect's attempt to fulfill itself. It is well known that we desire things that are not already with us in full or in a satisfying quantity. As the desires in us, so are our thoughts. Thoughts are disturbances created in our mental zone by our desires. Actions are thoughts projected and expressed in the world. Thus, in the chain of ignorance, constituted of desires, thoughts, and actions, each one of us is caught and bound. So we see that ignorance, when functions in the intellect, expresses itself as desires, and when desires function in the mental zone, express themselves as thoughts, and when thoughts expressed in the outer world become our actions. So the supreme is the experience beyond ignorance. Supreme self is the state of desirelessness or the condition of thoughtlessness or the life of actionlessness. Now, how do we act? There are three tendencies in each of us. Let me talk about them as our triple tendencies. By mere renunciation of action, no one attains perfection. Running away from life is not the way to reach the highest goal of evolution. Man is ever agitated under the influence of the triple tendencies of inactivity, sattva, activity, rajas, inactivity, tamas. So these three tendencies are sattva, raja, tama, inactivity, activity, inactivity, respectively. It's inherent in all of us. Even for a single moment, man cannot remain totally inactive. Total inactivity is the character of utterly insentient matter. Even if we are physically at rest, mentally and intellectually we are active at the same time, except during the state of deep sleep. So long as we are under the influence of these three mental tendencies, we are helplessly prompted to labor, to work hard, to act. Therefore, not to act at all is to disobey the laws of nature. Therefore, Gita advises to act vigorously with a right attitude of mind so that we may avoid all internal waste of energy and learn to grow. To sit back physically retired is not the way to reach anywhere, much less the final state of perfection. If this physical retirement is not efficiently accompanied by an equal amount of mental and intellectual withdrawal from the sensuous fields, the spiritual future of such a misfortune seeker is surely very bleak. The mind is fed, nurtured, and nourished by the five organs of perception, with stimuli drawn from the outer world of sense objects. If the mind is not cooperating with the sense organs, perception is impossible, even though the objects may be within the field of the organs. For example, when we are deeply attentive and fully interested in reading a book, we don't hear even when somebody calls us very nearby. So how do we control the sense organs by mind? This can be effectively achieved only when the mind is given a brighter and diviner field to roam about in. By withdrawing the organs of perception from their unprofitable fields of activity, we save on the inner energy which is spent through the organs of activity on a chosen field of work. Because of our inner attitude of non-attachment during the activity, no new rubbish is gathered by our mind. But on the contrary, it gets itself burnished by the removal of its existing mental dirt. In our workaday world, we must understand our bounden duty. We call it as Nitya Karma or maybe Niyatam Karma. To include all obligatory actions at home, office, and in the society as a national being. Thus, not to perform diligently all our duties at home, in the world outside, would be inaction. Even a healthy bodily existence is not possible if we were to live in complete inertia and inactivity. Inactivity brings about the destruction of the nation, of the society, and of the home. and often the very individual himself becomes victimized by his own idleness and suffers physical debilities and intellectual deterioration. Now we say that we must act. We should know how the act binds, what kind of acts bind us. Does every action bind? This is a beautiful question. Let us look into it. It is wrong to suppose that actions lead to bondage and therefore they should not be performed. Every action doesn't bring about bondages upon the doer. It's only unintelligent activities that thicken the impressions in the mind and thus successfully build a thick and impenetrable wall between the ego center and the unlimited divine spark of life in us. Every action motivated by egocentric desires thickens the veil and permits not even a single ray of the essential divinity to peep through it, to illumine the life in us. Any self-sacrificing work undertaken in a spirit of self-dedication for the blessing of all cannot be self-degrading and therefore it is self-liberating. It cannot bind. Let me talk about the yajna spirit while we are doing our actions. According to traditional viewpoints, all activities other than yajna will bring about vasana bondages. Yajna means any social, communal, national or personal activity into which the individual is ready to pour himself forth entirely in a spirit of service and dedication. We all know it. Such activities can be undertaken in a spirit of divine loyalty only when the worker has no attachment. Look at the creation, the natural laws. We can see the spirit of self-dedicated activities. The yajna spirit is everywhere around. The sun shines, the moon appears, the sea throbs, the earth bears, all in a spirit of sacrifice and self-dedicated motherly love with never even a trace of attachment or any kind of self-erogating motive. The Creator created the world along with the spirit of service and the capacity of sacrifice. We all know about the mythological cow, Kamadhenu. Kamadhenu, this mythological cow, supposed to have belonged to sage Vasishtha, from where all desires could be milled out. This means that no achievement is impossible for man if he knows how to act in the discipline of cooperation and if he is ready to bring forth into his activities the required amount of non-attachment and a spirit of sacrifice. Man alone is given the freedom to act as he likes, and to this extent he disobeys the universal law of sacrifice. To that extent he comes to suffer, because he, with his arrogant and egoistic actions, bring discord in the harmony of the existence around him. So how do we do our acts? With self-realization. Man is essentially an imitating animal. This is a psychological truth. The more rejuvenation of a society in any period of history can take place only because of the examples set up by the leaders of that nation. Students can be disciplined only when teachers are well behaved. The minor officials cannot be kind and honest when the rulers of the country are corrupt tyrants. Children's behavior all depends upon the standard of purity and culture of their parents. These masses always tell us that everybody imitate their leaders. Sri Krishna makes it very clear by stating that if he did not continue to work without relaxation, men also would follow him and sink themselves into inactivity. We all act in our own given fields of activities with all enthusiasm and deep interest, all day through, every day of the year, all through the years of our entire lifetime. A man of self-realization also works in the same world with as much diligence and sincerity, tireless enthusiasm, and with energizing joy. The only difference between the two is that while the ignorant acts and is motivated in his actions by his attachments and anxieties for his fruits, a man of godly intentions or complete perfection works with no attachment, only for the purpose of the redemption of the world. Attachment becomes a clog or a painful chain on us only when it's extremely egocentric. To the extent we work for larger schemes to bless a vaster section of humanity, to the extent the attachment loses its poison. Many poisons serve as medicines, we know, in their diluted forms, while the same thing in a concentrated form can bring instantaneous death. The ego and egocentric desires bind and destroy us. But to the extent we can lift these identifications to include and accommodate in it larger sections of the living world, to that extent the attachment gathers an ethical halo, a divine glow, and becomes a cure for our subjective pains and imperfections. That's why the motive behind our action, I was also telling it in the last session, how motives count more than our actions. So we must know what are the motives behind our actions. A serpent is dangerous only as long as its fangs are not removed. The moment these are taken out, even the most poisonous reptile becomes a tame creature incapable of harming anyone. Similarly, action gives rise to bondage only when it is performed with selfish desires. Actions performed without desires are not actions at all, inasmuch as they are incapable of producing any painful reactions. The renunciation of action only means the giving up of the wrong motives behind the actions. Not only it is sufficient that we renounce all wrong actions, but we have also to make a few adjustments in our inner instruments in order to bring out an unobstructed flow of the supreme will without hope and without ego. Why without hope and without ego? What is hope? Hope is the expectation of a happening that is yet to manifest and a mature in a future period of time. Whatever be the hope, it belongs not to the present. It refers to a period of future, not yet born. And what is ego? Our egocentric concept of ourselves is nothing but a bundle of happenings and achievements of ours which took place in the past moments. Ego is therefore the shadow of the past, and it has an existent reality only with a reference to the dead moments of the past. If hope is thus the child of the unborn future, ego is the lingering memory of a dead past. To revel in ego and hope is an attempt on our part to live either with the dead moments of the past or with the unborn moments of the future. And all the while, the tragedy is that we miss the present, the now. The active, dynamic present, which is the only noble chance that is given to us to create, to advance, to achieve, to enjoy. We have to live here and now in the midst of situations in life and to experience them through our sacred vehicles of the body, the mind, and the intellect. So, what do we do? We all know about this, this term, or maybe a point from Bhagavad Gita. Swadharme nidhanam shreya parodharma bhayabha. Swadharma is not the duty which accrues to an individual because of his caste. In its right import, Swadharma means the type of vasanas that one discovers in one's own mind. To act according to one's own taste, inborn and natural. It's only known method of living in peace and joy, in success and satisfaction. To act against the grain of one's own vasanas would be acting in terms of paradharma. There is no living man who doesn't have a sufficiently clear conception of the good and the meritorious. Even one understands intellectually what it is right, but it's only when it comes to action that one invariably gets tempted to do the wrong. It all happens with everyone. This paradoxical confusion between one's own ideology and one's own actions becomes quite a big problem to those who try to introspect and review themselves. The divine in us, with its nobler aspirations, wants to fulfill itself with its higher impulses, but the animal instinct in us tempts us away. This invariably happens even against our own wishes. Many times we feel that, we see that, we observe that. The desire, anger, emotion in us compels us to compromise with our own intellectually known higher values and tempts us to perpetrate sins, bad karmas, bad actions, wrong actions. Once desire comes to the manifest in our intellect, it enshrouds the wisdom in us. It dilutes our rational capacity and chokes our discrimination. And that's why we fail to do the right thing. So as I conclude the Karma Yoga Bhagavad Gita, let me remind you all that the term yoga means the art of connecting the lower with the higher through a technique consisting of one's self-evolution. Any method by which the lower in us is educated and trained to live a higher way of life, wherein we gain a more effective control upon both our life without and life within, is called yoga. I once again want to highlight, we have to live here and now in the midst of situations in life and to experience them through our sacred vehicles of the body, mind and intellect. The Supreme Soul is the state of desirelessness or the condition of thoughtlessness, a life of actionlessness. From action to right action, then to actionlessness. It's a journey of lower self to the higher self. And this is truly a yoga, and that is Karma Yoga. Thank you all.